Back in the 90s, when Street Fighter II was the hottest game out there, it seemed natural that there'd eventually be a movie version, and before the live-action film that you're probably familiar with, there was an animated feature out of Japan. It's called Street Fighter II, despite the fact that it's not a sequel. I guess only because it's based off of the Street Fighter II game. Most Americans weren't aware of it until well after the live-action Street Fighter movie came out, so the title can be confusing because the American movie is called Street Fighter and this one is Street Fighter II, but I assure you, this one came first. There's also several versions of it, but they're all variations on either the original Japanese release or the American dubbed version. The main differences in the dubbed version, other than the American voices, is that it's censored, mostly for language, and for a moment of brief nudity, and the soundtrack is different. Instead of having Japanese music, there's contemporary American music. My review is based off the original Japanese version, which I watched with subtitles, though I have seen the American one as well, and I can tell you the difference is both great and small at the same time. The censorship is really no big deal. The newer American versions, which advertise as being uncut, only restore a few seconds that you can see Chun-Li's boobs. Considering that the shot is a bit of a shameless fan service that adds nothing to the movie, if you missed it, you didn't miss much. Plus, it's a damn cartoon. The big difference, though, is the dub. The voice acting in the American version is so fucking awful that it will cause you to vomit your sanity out of your eyeballs. Now, for all I know, the Japanese acting could be just as bad, as I don't speak Japanese, and I can't tell if they're using the right intonation, but I can tell you that the Japanese voices sound a lot more natural than the American ones, who all sound like they're being auditioned for a radio commercial circa 1954. The plot of the movie is based loosely on the Super Street Fighter II Turbo game. I say loosely because it was a fighting game with only minimal cutscenes that happened during the ending, so there really wasn't much of a story. Later games, such as the Street Fighter Alpha series, would greatly expand on the story, but believe it or not, a lot of the stuff that came later on in the games was inspired by this movie. If you watch it after having played the Alpha series, the movie seems very accurate and faithful to the lore. But keep in mind, the movie actually came first. Also of note, as I was watching the Japanese version, it used the Japanese names. For example, the guy with the claw is Balrog, the boxer is Bison, and the dictator is Vega. But to avoid confusion, I'll use the American names for these review. Most of the plot centers on Ryu, a wandering Japanese karate warrior. He basically wanders around the globe searching for meaning and keeps getting sucked into fights for one reason or another. His power level is off the scale, as noted by Bison, head of the Shadowloo crime syndicate. Shadowloo wants to take over the world, and Bison wants to make himself more powerful by absorbing the fighting ability of the world's greatest fighters, so he makes a bunch of robots that can find the fighters and gauge their powers. Working against Shadowloo are Chun-Li, an Interpol agent, and Guile, a lieutenant commander in the Air Force. The beginning has Ryu Fighting Saga, sort of giving a nod to the end of the original Street Fighter game. Sagat is extremely powerful, but Ryu defeats him with his special moves, his Shoryuken punch cutting through Sagat's chest and leaving him with a scar. Sagat winds up with Shadowloo and hopes to fight Ryu again to reclaim his honor, but Bison won't allow it. One of Bison's robots was watching the battle, and they've been looking for Ryu ever since because his power is greater than any other fighter. Along the way, they also find out about Ryu's greatest rival and close friend Ken, whose fighting ability is equal to Ryu's, but he hasn't reached his full potential. Ken is kind of listless because nobody is a decent challenger except for Ryu, who disappeared years ago to wander around. As the plot continues, Ryu gets sucked into various fights, such as with the movie star Fei Long, and plenty of random nameless guys, and there's other fight scenes that sometimes move the plot forward, and sometimes they're just there to tick a few characters off the list. Literally every character from Super Street Fighter II Turbo makes an appearance, even if it's not necessary for the plot, such as the scene where Blanca and Zangief fight for no reason other than to entertain people, or the cameo by Akuma, who literally is just sort of sitting on the ground leaning against a wall. Sometimes, however, it does move the plot forward, such as the fight between Dalsum and E. Honda. Dalsum is kicking Honda's ass, but he gets distracted by Ryu's powerful energy. Honda thanks Ryu for helping him win the fight, and they become friends and start training together. Ken also gets into a pointless fight with DJ, check another one off the list, and there's a bunch of crap with Guile and Chun-Li. They're both going after Shadowloo for both professional and personal reasons. Though honestly, it doesn't have much to do with anything. Bison sends Vega after Chun-Li, and after she beats him, her injuries put her in the hospital for the rest of the movie. And Guile doesn't get to do much at the end other than confirm Shadowloo's fall. Bison captures Ken and brainwashes him, and they go to kidnap Ryu. Guile fights Bison, Ryu fights Ken, and E Honda fights Balrog. Guile just gets his ass kicked, and when Ken comes to his senses, he teams up with Ryu and they take down Bison together. E Honda apparently beat Balrog off camera. My main issue with the movie is that there's just so many characters, and most of them aren't needed. Like in the very beginning, there's a whole part with Cammy assassinating the Prime Minister of the UK and then getting captured. She's not seen for the rest of the movie, and it was just to set up Shadowloo and the mind control, but I think it could have been handled better. Some characters like DJ, Zangief, Blanca, and T-Hawk are on screen for less than a minute, and even important characters like Sagat don't do much. Sagat just basically stands in the background looking menacing and then whines about wanting to fight Ryu, something that doesn't happen. The animation ranges from passable to downright choppy, but, well, it's anime. Most anime is choppy. Probably the best scene in the whole movie is the fight between Vega and Chun-Li, partially because it's a brutal fight that goes on for a long time, and not a quickie like the rest of the fight scenes, and it juxtaposes well with the mellow music playing on Chun-Li's stereo at the time. And I think the animation was smoother for that fight than the rest of the movie. It's like they put a lot of effort into that one scene and sort of slacked off on the rest of it. That being said, it may not be a great movie, but it was an incredibly influential one. The games borrowed heavily from it, with scenes such as Ken giving his hair ribbon to Ryu to use as a bandana. It became part of the lore. And a lot of the character designs, such as the younger long-haired Ken and the hooded Cammy and caped Bison, would wind up in the games as well. For all my complaints, the movie is entertaining if you're a fan of the games. You'll probably enjoy it, and that's what this feature is about. Looking at Street Fighter II objectively, it's an average animated movie, nothing special. But looking at it as a fan of the games, it's highly entertaining, so I'm going to be generous with my score. And even though it wasn't exactly great, out of the 3 movies that have been based on Street Fighter, it was by far the best, which really says a lot for how bad the other 2 are. That being said, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10, but it comes with a warning. The American dubbed version is so irritating that it's more like a 4 due to the horrible voice acting, and this one is really for fans of Street Fighter only. Anyone else will probably just think it's flashy, stupid, and pointless, but for those of us who grew up pumping quarters into a Street Fighter II machine, it's at least worth a look. So yeah, a 6 out of a possible 10.